So, hello everyone. Today is a very special day, and I thought of sharing something very um, deep and meaningful with all of you today. And I wanted to actually speak about this great legend of ours, our founder, our grandfather of homeopathy, the great Dr. Samuel Hahnemann. So, we've all been studying Samuel Hahnemann and about him and about homeopathy. But I thought of today sharing with you a little bit of studying him as a person. How was he? How did he live his life? Who all were there in his life? What were the principles he kept for himself? What kind of person was he actually, practically? So, while studying about him, I learned a lot, and I don't know if I can tell all of that today, but I'm going to share some of his very interesting thing that I studied about him through different biographies, through different journals, through different writings, by visiting countries and knowing from different literature. So let's talk about Hahnemann, and well, we know that he was born in 1755. He was the third child. But about him, he was very brilliant as a young boy. He was from a very simple family. His father was a painter, but he was extraordinarily brilliant. He was so brilliant that at the age of 10, he knew more than five languages. And he was so brilliant that the people around him and the local school started giving him free tuitions on different subjects. At this point, he left for Leipzig and he started studying under the wing of one of the famous physician during that time, Quarin, Joseph von Quarin. And he tried to learn modern medicine. At that time, you can say allopathy. And at this point, he also completed within no time his medical degree. It's very interesting when I talk to you about Hahnemann, but when you study Hahnemann, you come to know that in his life span, there was a point where in 20 years he has changed 20 locations of his life. This is quite interesting because most of us, when we live our life and we change from one place to another, or change one job to another, or change our practice, we get so worried and stressed. And but this guy, in 20 years of his lifespan, he at a time when he was practicing, he changed 20 different places, and he was able to write more than 550 pages of writing. So this shows a lot of his focus and his intent. This was the Leipzig University at that time, and then he moved to Dessau in 1781, and he met his to be first wife, Johanna Henriette Kuschler, and they when she was 17 at that time they married, and they had 11 children. At this point, he was appointed the medical officer of a place, Goman. But what is interesting is that when I study about him, he clearly wasn't so interested in clinical medicine and the practice that time, and he wasn't very vocal about it. But what is interesting that you come to know is that his main income was by translating books, and especially many of them by chemistry. So he spent very less time practicing initially in modern medicine, but spent more time translating books, and that's where he the kind of person he was an alchemy of different knowledges of chemistry, of medicine, of foreign languages, of physics. So he knew a lot of different subjects, and his family was increasing. I told you about his 11 children, but uh, in his writings and when he was translating, he was also writing a little bit about his thoughts. And in many of his writings, he wrote about the importance of diet and non-interventional therapies, where even without medicine, how a patient can get better. This is where his focus and his writing were. It's quite interesting. In 1789, he moved to Leipzig, and at this point, till this point, he actually almost stopped practicing modern medicine because, as we rightly know, that he was quite disdained and disgraced by the type of practice that was happening, the leeching, the all the therapies that were happening during that time in 1700s were he was quite critical, let me put it this way. In 1790, again, this is interesting, this again came when he was translating one of Cullen's Materia Medica, that we now know was where homeopathy was born, because this is where he became interested in relationship between curative effects of cinchona and its poisoning symptom. And because of this interest, he started kind of proving, he gave a test of cinchona upon himself, and that's when he led to this principle. So actually, homeopathy was born in 1796. He called it as the new principle. You can see this is the literature. Most of the literature I'm showing you, this is studied by me and my team night and day, just for all of you. And he wrote in 1796 his first essay on new principle for ascertaining the curative powers of drugs and some examination of previous principle. This is where homeopathy was born. And then he also wrote about the scarlet fever and the small dosages. But what is interesting, in this much time, he was almost written more than 5,000 pages. He had written literature on homeopathy. He was doing a lot of research. At this point, he brought a home in talk and also wrote an article about medicine of experience to Hoffland's journal. And during this time, 1796, he was homeopathy. He kind of was discovering this, and by 1810, he had already written the Organon of rational healing. You can see this is the first page and the first text of it. And during this time, there was a like a huge you can say a vacancy available in one of the top schools, where they would give the job to a person who can debate about modern medicine. This was interesting because Hahnemann was anti-modern medicine, but Hahnemann took up the challenge, and he spoke a lot about use of Helleborus as a conventional against conventional medicine, and he spoke about how domestically it was used, and it was brilliant what he spoke about. And he got this job at this place, and he was accepted at the university. He started teaching. He was called as a raging hurricane, because he started talking so much about how modern medicine is actually so disgraceful and disdainful, that he started forming a small group of young blooded people who were interested in this new principle of homeopathy. And he formed this small group who later on became his provers union, his small team. And at this point, typhus was an infection very rampant in Leipzig, and there was a lot of fights between the army of Napoleon, etc. At this point, I want to tell you, Hahnemann wasn't interested too much in politics. He felt all this politics, army, news, is all just an obstruction for his work. It's quite interesting, shows the magnanimity of the man. So in 1813, typhus was rampant, and allopathy wasn't able to help. Even 20% people were not able to live with allopathy. So he took up typhus cases, 180 cases he took up, out of which 178 he was able to totally cure with homeopathy, with his and his team. This showed the efficacy of homeopathy in remarkable infectious diseases. And at this point, he started writing about chronic disease, and he published in 1828 the chronic diseases. At this point, he also spoke about miasms, and he started speaking about the sora, psychosis, syphilis, miasms. And he moved to Cothen with his children, 7 daughters, and his wife. His wife at this point died at 1830. At this point, there was a huge outcry about, let's start a homeopathic hospital and school. But Hahnemann in 1832 he was a very critical person, but he was really critical at this point. He started writing in newspapers about half homeopaths, because what homeopaths during that time would do, they would mix up allopathy and homeopathy together and themselves prescribe allopathy. And he called them as half homeopaths, and he was really very critical and hurtful towards them, rightly so. And he was really practicing well at Cothen, and things were going okay. At this point in 1834, Milani D Havel, a painter, an artist from Paris, came to consult Hahnemann for her tic douloureux, and she was in a bad situation with the twitching. But within few days, Hahnemann treated Melanie with homeopathy, and it is said in the writings, which I was quite pleasantly surprised. That on the third day of meeting Melanie, Hahnemann proposed Melanie, and with permission of Melanie's father, they kind of married, and by June 1834 they moved to Paris, and that is when 1834 to 1843, that is almost roughly about 9 or 10 years, were the most beautiful years of Hahnemann according to him, and um, this shows a lot about the kind of affection that he had for Melanie and Melanie had for him, and how they worked together. They had an amazingly busy and cream de la practice, so a huge practice in Paris, where they would see the rich of the Paris and even the simple people. And in 1843, in April, Hahnemann came down with bronchitis, and then he was no more. But it's quite interesting what all he spoke to Melanie. He told Melanie that he wants Melanie to take up homeopathy to the next level, and that Melanie was the most brilliant of his associate, because Melanie at this point in Paris started studying homeopathy, and Hahnemann started teaching Melanie. So Melanie had a brilliant memory, and Melanie also almost by hearted the chronic disease, so she knew all the remedies by heart. Um, so because of this, and Hahnemann's memory wasn't that great towards the end, so Melanie almost became like a repertory for him, where she would take the case and tell the main symptoms, and Hahnemann would prescribe, and they would see a lot of cases. And at this point, towards the end, Hahnemann told Melanie that I want you to take homeopathy to the next level, and I will meet you in the heaven. And this was a very beautiful moment. When I was reading it, it was quite surreal to know the person behind the statues that we see around of Hahnemann. And he had written 6 editions. The sixth edition was later on. There was a lot of complication about the sixth edition, because a lot of people wanted to buy it and publish it, and there was a lot of complication. Finally, Melanie was able to, with the help of later on Bonning Hussein's son, and later on with the help of Richard Hale, able to come up with the sixth edition. But I want to also talk to you about Hahnemann the person. I told you Hahnemann was never thought of politics as important. He somehow was very interested in healing, and the idea of homeopathy. He was almost very focused about understanding homeopathy and the principles. One of the habits that he had was smoking, and he was a pipe smoker. And um, um, people would ask him, why are you smoking, and he would say it's a ideal habit contracted when he had to sit up in order to get bread for his children, and pursuing investigation he needed some kind of support. I remember here a very interesting thing, that Hahnemann had a small house in Paris, and a small garden. It's very small, and he would love walking in this garden with a lantern. And one day, one visitor came and asked him, "Oh, you have such a small garden?" And he said, "Yeah, it's a small garden, but it's quite high." So he was trying to say that the length of the garden is small, but if you see it right from down to up, it's as high as the sky. This showed his imaginative and analytical state also. His daily life is that, like I rightly said, he would get up at 6 a.m. almost, would drink milk, he would love beef and mutton, and roasted veal and pork a lot. And the only vegetables he would have is beans, cabbage, spinach, and as much as possible he would like, in fact, a sweetened goose. It's a kind of a mild beer that he would like. You Very interesting. And he would like to sleep sometime after having um, his lunch for some time. And he also had a small pet dog who he would keep next to him. And he was very fond of chess, but couldn't play because he didn't have much time. About Hahnemann's pupil, he had a small inner circle, um, which he later on formed like a Provers Union, which had Groth, Staff, Hornberg, Franz, Schuckenberg, Hartmann, Rockert, Langhammer, Hartmann. This is how Staff and Hartmann looked. Staff was probably one of the most brightest of his team, and he worked a lot on olfaction of remedies. Melanie Hahnemann, we should talk about her because I believe towards the later part of his life, Hahnemann, like we say that behind every very very successful man there is a woman, and Melanie Hahnemann was quite an important. She speaks about learning homeopathy, that how she was initially interpreter. You have to understand that Hahnemann came from Germany and then stayed at Paris, so um, he served initially as she served initially as an interpreter, a secretary who wrote down all the case taking for him, and made it really easy for Hahnemann to see a large number of patients. This is how she would look. Hahnemann said to Melanie, um, this he wrote with his own hand. Really, I could not do better myself. I wish the world could know what a good homeopath you are. He speaks to Melanie because Melanie was very closely related to him. To which she replied that my life to you is closely bound, to your happiness devoted. My place in your noble heart I found, no other in this world I do desire. Hahnemann did a lot of creative things also. He formed what is called as Hanuman Cocktail. It was a drink that they would give to alcoholics. It would mix Naxomic and capsicum, and it would remove the alcoholic tendency. Quite interesting. So this is what I wanted to share with all of you. What I realized when I was going through a lot of his literature, of a lot of things about Hahnemann was, um, he was just a normal guy like you and me, and he had a lot of obstruction. He had a lot of sufferings. He didn't give up. He just walked the path. He never gave up. He just walked the path. He just focused at what he wanted, and he just went with the flow. He was like a hurricane. He formed his team, and he changed the modern science forever. He was almost like a one-man army. Again, shows the fact that if one human being decides, he can change the world. So this is what I want to share with you today. This is a presentation. A lot of work has gone into this. This is my entire team. Dr. Juhi, Amina, Yash, Shivani, Utsav, they have all worked on this a lot. And also thanks to my YouTube channel, Alpeshos and Pratik, who have helped me a lot. Please write to me how you like my today's talk. We had to undergo a lot of study to share with you this kind of talk. Write to me and stay inspired.